Well, good evening, everybody. Thank you very much for asking me to join you tonight. And I am trying now to figure out how to advance my slides. Okay, here we go. So as Abby said, my name is Karen Johnson. I work with Cargill Animal Nutrition. Actually, yesterday or Monday was the start of my 34th year with Cargill. I've had many different roles with the company, but my background has always been in agriculture. I have a bachelor in animal science and dairy nutrition from Cornell. Currently, I live in Jamestown, New York with my husband, Steve, and our puppy dog, who's in the middle down there, Royal Blue. My job with Cargill, I've had many roles, but currently I'm a senior field representative. So I work in store, supporting mainly the Nutrina brand of feed, if you're familiar with that. And also I do a lot of training, retail in-store execution, and a lot of consumer events. Um, on a side note, I grew up in Genesee County in the big town of East Bethany, New York. My family is Lorob Dairy Farm, so I have a dairy background, and I'm very proud of my brother and his efforts with our family 6-horse hitch, which is pictured here a couple times. So let's get right into this. I know that we wanted to talk about, and I have a little delay on my end getting the slides to go. I apologize. There we go. So we're going to talk about forage tonight. So first question for you, um, for those horse owners out there, forage of good quality should make up what percentage of the average adult horse's total diet? And feel free to type it in the chat or just think about that. And the correct answer is, believe it or not, 90% for an average adult horse's total diet. So when I'm doing nutritional consultations, it's definitely the first thing I want to talk about is what is the hay or forage available for the diet. I do sell feed for a living, but feed is secondary to anything forage related that's on the farm that you're feeding to not only your horses, but any species. So one thing I want to talk about tonight is there's definitely certain factors that influence forage quality. There's 6 major ones. Some of these we can control. Some are kind of out of our control depending on environment and that type of thing. But definitely maturity, the crop species, is it a grass, a legume, the harvest and storage conditions, the environment, which obviously right now we're in a little bit of a drought factor, soil fertility, and the variety. So the thing here on the right, basically what that's showing is as your maturity increases, your quality of forage definitely goes down. So another question for you. Select or think about all your senses. Which ones might you utilize to evaluate the hay or forage in your diet? So the senses we can use are our smell, sight, and touch. So let's talk about this for a minute. When you use your senses to physically assess forage, you can do this without using a lab analysis. So the physical things you're going to look at are the touch. How's the texture? Are there a lot of leaves in it? And by texture, I like to say, is the hay prickly? Is it soft? Is it something you'd want to put in your mouth? Smell, definitely. Smell is something you can't test for. So if you smell something that is off, mold, dust, those are some of the things you can actually smell. Color, when we put in hay right now, it's going to be nice and bright green. That color that deteriorates over time is basically the keratin in the feed. Weed contact and lack of poisonous plants. I know we could probably do an entire seminar on poisonous plants, but we'll touch on that just a little bit. So it is selecting high quality hay is the most important factor in your horse's diet. And just remember that, basic forage analysis is never going to ID or show you mold, dust, or poisonous plants. I apologize for the delay. Okay. So when you're going to do a physical evaluation, I think it jumped ahead a little bit on me. Touch, you want to look at the leaves. A high proportion of leaves is desired. Leaves obviously contain more nutrients than stems, and 80% of the nutrients, especially the protein and energy content, are found in your leaves. An alfalfa variety of leaf will contain 4 times the crude protein and 7 times the keratin as the stems. And you also want to see if there's any seed heads, because if you see seed heads, this means that actually the forage is past optimal maturity. Texture, this is pertains to the stem size and the palatability. You can have all the great hay in the world, but if the texture isn't something that your animal desires, they're not going to eat it. They're not going to eat the maximum quantity to get the maximum value out of the forage. So fine stem hay, it's really soft to the touch, indicates that it's really palatable or acceptable to the horse. Small pliable stems are desired, and the softness indicates a lower lignin content. And lignin is basically the fiber content that is undigestible. So i.e. the nice fiber pieces and sources that you find when you're cleaning your horse's stall. So smell is very useful in evaluating. You can smell or musty or moldy odor is not acceptable to horses. Horses are very susceptible to mold toxicity or colic. They also actually have a lot of COPD concerns, chronic obstructive pulmonary disorder, something you've probably heard about in the last couple days on the news for anybody human that has that consideration with all the smoke in the air. Also, if you smell or you see it's brown in color, accompanied by more of a caramelized odor, that indicates that there's been some heating that's taken place and the crude protein actually will be decreased. And we'll see for that in a forage analysis here in the middle. Color, bright green indicates absence of weathering, mold, and heat damage. You can also, what I tell a lot of people, if hay has been in storage a while, peel back that first outer layer that may have gotten a discoloration just because of light or sun. It may be deceiving what you see on the inside. Sight, weed content, look for weeds, look for those weed heads. Certain weeds are very poisonous. I've got a list here on the right. If you have any question about poisonous plants, definitely talk to Ken, who's the Livingston County Extension agent for anything that you're concerned about. Better to be safe.
You don't have to listen to horse feed analysis.
Yes, that would be good.
Are you serious?
Okay, so next poll. Which factor has the biggest impact on the quality of a cutting of hay? And the answer is definitely the maturity. Here's another question for you. When is it highly recommended to pull a forage analysis and send it to a lab? A, every horse owner, every load of hay. For horses with severe sensitivity to starches, some with laminitis, Cushing's, for young growing horse diets, or both B and C. And yes, I recommend both B and C. It's not going to be conducive for every horse owner for every load of hay. I do recommend that if you're purchasing hay and you're going to have a majority of your hay in for a 6 to 8 month time period, for the price it costs to get a hay analysis done, it's good insurance that you're, number one, paying for what you get. And that also, if you do have any questions or you do have horses in these middle categories, we can take a look and see what may be lacking in the hay to make up for it in the diet. So I'm just going to fly through this really quickly. There's definitely a couple different ways you can collect a sample of hay. The grab sample is the easiest, and option 2 is a probe sample. The probing is definitely more accurate because you're actually crossing the entire bale or round bale and grabbing different samples. So I'm going to share a video now, and you may want to just turn your volume up a little bit. This is the grab sample.
Hey, we're going to take a quick sample of hay. Here's send it off the lab. Ideally, what you'll do is open up a bale of hay pan it so that you have your hay open so you can easily grab a handful of that hay. Pull up the can out the middle of the hay. As you're doing so, you're going to get an idea of how the hay texture is, whether it's coarse or soft. Smell the hay, see how fresh it smells. If you smell anything that's not correct, put it in your pre-filled out bag. You'll be ready to send off to our lab in Elk River, Minnesota.
This next video is, you're going to know, this is Dr. Jim Ward. Dr. Jim is definitely from Texas, but this is a really good video to show you exactly how a hay probing works.
I'm a veterinary worker for him. Demonstrate today how to take a hay sample. I have a hay sample bag that's already pre-addressed going to Elk River, Minnesota to our forage lab. We're going to demonstrate how to take it with this forage probe, and we'll unscrew it. We'll put this it's threaded where you can screw it in. This instrument is extremely sharp. That's why I'm wearing gloves. This dowel rod is there to clean out the probe, and the risk is when you are pushing this in and you don't wear gloves, it'll come through and knock out the forage out of the barrel and cut your fingers. So that's the reason for that. So anyway, so with that said, we're going to now take the hay sample and we use our hip or thigh to do it. It makes it much easier. What you don't want to do is try to do it with your upper body strength or jab it in. That ends up crimping that edge down where it won't sample right. So we'll put the probe into the bale a little bit. I'll take my hand and I'm holding it against my leg. And then as we enter the bale, we're going to do a little twisting action of it. And then we'll clean the barrel like that. See, that's the motion that can cause your fingers to get cut. All right, so we're going to go down. We're going to sample another bale. And again, I'm using my leg. Makes it much easier. So we'll do several bales here, and we always go in on the end of the bale. We don't want to go in on the side; it just separates the layer. So we'll do one up here. Normally we sample 6 to 8 bales, and so we've got an adequate sample here. So we'll take this loose. The hay is now collected down into this receptacle. We'll take and then pour it into our bag. I think you can see that it really grinds it up finely, so it makes for a really nice sample. And then it's ready to seal. We've already pre-filled it out. One of the things you want to do is fill it out before you put your hay in there, because it's hard to write on it once it's got the hay in there. So now we can seal it up. We'll put it in our baler and mail it into our forage laboratory. Well, that completes our hay sampling demonstration. Thank you very much.
Okay, I know Dr. Ward talks a lot about cutting yourself, and believe me, he is absolutely correct. I have done that so many times. Those edges are very sharp. If you're interested in actually knowing where to buy one of those probes, we did a little research, and there's several of the NASCO, I think, online places that do have those available. So working for Cargill, I am very fortunate because we have our own forage lab. So there's really, that's where I send my analysis. And I just wanted to go through, you're going to see the same thing if you send it to like the Dairy One, the forage lab in Ithaca, New York. But this is kind of what it asks you or asks myself as the consultant when I'm sending in the test. You know, we really, first of all, we really want to know what cutting it is, when it was sampled, and the crop year. Now, also, you know, we can do any type of forage. We can do legume, which is your alfalfa, is your grass, a mixed, a small grain, if you got oat, hay, or straw, and then some other things as far as feed or raw ingredients. There's different packages that you can do. And I typically do the basic equine forage analysis. That gives me a lot of the information I need. If I am working with a very larger breeding farm or performance horse operation, I will do the advanced because that does give me a little bit more as far as the trace minerals, which is really important to have balanced correctly for growth, etc. Okay. Just to give you an idea, the cost, I believe of the basic is 20 something dollars. It's gone up a little bit. For advanced, it's a $28 charge. So Ken was very helpful. He actually took some samples out of 3 fields that from this year and sent them in. So the forage samples that I'm going to show you now are from Livingston County. This is the first one. And in the chat, I know that Ken has some videos that he kind of pans across the hay. This, I believe, is the field 3 that we're looking at right now. And what I'm going to show you next is actually the analysis that came back from our forage lab. Now, this is a 2022 hay, first cutting. And there's a lot of different information on here, guys. I'm just going to point out a couple things that I really take a look at. First of all, moisture. Okay. Now, a lot of people wonder what this DM is. That's the dry matter basis, as is with the moisture in it. So aren't some of you shocked that the moisture on hay is actually 11%? Tip, if a moisture level comes back greater than 14, that's a really great indication that you may have some mold growth, or mold may grow, because that's a pretty high moisture content. So a couple of the things I look at, obviously, are the crude protein. And then you can also see heat damaged protein and available protein. And notice how on a dry basis, let me get my little pointer here. I'm looking at these numbers here. Crude protein at 9.24 on a dry basis. There's actually 0.84% that's heat damage, which basically means it's not available to be used. So the protein level that I would input into a program for a nutritional consultant is at 8.4. I'm going down through here, ash, that's your total mineral content. And then you've got a bunch of different fiber levels, ADF and NDF. And I'll tell you in a minute what the difference between those are. ADF is acid detergent fiber, NDF is neutral detergent fiber. Calcium and phosphorus, and then you've also got a low and high range here. So calcium and phosphorus in this is a 1.63 ratio. Low would be 2.1 to 4.1. So we definitely can tell that this is a grassier hay with not as much alfalfa in it. Potassium. This number I look at sometimes because if it's extremely high, that typically means that there was cattle manure spread on that field. This is right within a normal range. Also, we go down through here. This one we did do the copper and zinc level on, and then we get into a lot of different numbers on starch levels. We'll go into those in a minute. I don't want you to get really hung up on starch, but if you do have some horses that have some Cushing's disease or EPSM or insulin resistance, I really take a look at these numbers, especially since when you look at your hay, you know, 90% or 80% of the diet is going to be this forage. So if you take 20 to 25 pounds of hay times this starch number, that's the biggest portion of starch or sugars coming from the diet. Probably the biggest question I get asked by horse owners is, what's your lowest starch and sugar feed that you have available, or concentrate? And a lot of the times they forget that the majority of that nutrient is coming from your forage side. Down here on the bottom, DE, digestible energy. So this is like your calories that you and I eat. So what this is basically telling me is this sample of hay for every pound has about 890 calories provided of energy. So there's some of the things that we just went through. Okay. So we went through a couple of these. Just remember that I broke down here a little bit. Crude protein, it's a measure of the protein concentrate. Typically ranges from 8 to 14 in grass hays, 14 to 17 in mixed hays, and 15 to 20% in legumes. Just remember, since most horses require approximately a 10% crude protein total diet, that's for just your mature average horse that's maybe doing a little light activity. Crude protein usually is not limiting, because a lot of the time the hay, especially if you're feeding a decent grass hay, can make up most of the protein in that diet. What may be limiting is the crude protein if you're feeding a lactating mare, a foal, a growing horse, or a performance horse. You do need more specific protein sources, especially specific amino acids that may be limiting in the horse's diet that you're not going to get from the hay. As I said, there's a couple different fiber levels. ADF and NDF, they're measures of fiber. ADF consists of cellulose and lignin and other poorly digested components. So if you've got a value 30 to 35%, that's pretty good. Anything above 45%, it's not as great of nutritional value. There's just a lot that's going to be coming out the other end of your horse. NDF is a great number to look at too, because that includes more of the plant portion, the hemicellulose, cellulose, lignocellulose, and lignin. So this is the cell wall and structural carbohydrates, and that provide the plant with its actual structure. The higher the NDF of hay, usually the less likely a horse will consume it, or they won't consume as much maybe as typically expected. RFV, relative feed value, this was very common on a dairy hay analysis. It basically just gives you a range of, and it's not really calculated. I don't use it to balance a horse's diet at all. It's just basically a ranking of where your hay falls on a relative value. Fat is a measurement of the fat content. Fat is a really energy dense nutrient. You don't typically get a lot of fat from your forage sources, but just remember that when you're looking maybe at a grain source, fat contains about 2.5 times the energy as found in a carbohydrate source. So we always look at adding fat to a diet over carbohydrates if you need to increase energy levels, specifically for body condition in your horses. Okay, now we get into all these fancy numbers on starches. NFC, that's actually just a mathematical computation of starch and sugar. It's a good indicator of what's in the diet, but I like to look at these things a little bit more. I think I talked about the digestible energy, okay? And digestible energy, your horse eats calories just like you and I. 20 mcals per day. Think of that as like 20,000 calories that you and I eat, okay? So that's when we're talking calories. A horse, obviously, because it's much larger, we're looking at maybe a 2,000 calorie a day diet. They're looking at a 20,000 calorie a day diet, and that varies depending on their ages and activity levels. Calcium and phosphorus, we talked about a little bit. I really hone in on this number if we're feeding young growing horses. And last but not least, here is all these different things on starch. Okay. And again, don't get hung up in the weeds on all this. Starches are a great source of energy, but the thing I like to watch is that I don't want more than 15% of total calories from starch fed to horses that have some of the issues with starch content, the polysaccharide storage myopathy, the EPSM, Cushing's, any of those type of things. So there's different ways that labs can test for starch. Some are ESC, which is an ethanol soluble, and WSC, which is water soluble. Basically, the difference is the types of sugars and starches that's measuring. So again, don't get hung up on it. I use the water soluble a lot when I'm looking at cool season grasses, especially people that are trying to use a lot of grass in early springtime as a forage source with some of these horses that have some specific issues. So the back page of our analysis is kind of cool. There's a lot of information here, so I'm going to break it down. First of all, what it does is it takes that hay and it kind of shows you for an 1,100-pound horse in light work, eating 2% of their body weight as forage. So think about it. If you've got a 1,000-pound horse, that's 20 pounds of hay a day. Okay, 2% is kind of the magic number. Any horse that goes below 1 to 1.5% of their total body weight in forage as dry forage, that's when I add something else to the diet as a forage source, be it a beet pulp, alfalfa cube, something like that. 2% is the magic number that I'd like to target. So notice for this hay sample that we took of Ken's, the green bar shows you that means everything's met. Okay, if you're above that green bar, you're meeting those requirements. If you're below, you're probably going to need to do something to balance out the diet with the hay portion of the diet with some sort of grain. So we're just shy a little bit on crude protein and definitely a little bit under on some of your minerals. The next part of the actual hay analysis, okay, what this does is it shows you your current weight of the horse. So if you this is just using an average 1,100-pound horse. And if they're going to eat 25 pounds a day, which is roughly that 2% body intake, this is the calorie content of that feed as we looked at it on an as-fed basis from the front of the analysis. So if they eat that, this is how many calories they're going to get from just that hay alone. Okay, great. So what that's saying is based on different classes of work, a maintenance horse probably is going to need absolutely no extra calories in his or her diet. The forage is supporting that just fine. Now, if you have horses that are in light, moderate, heavy work, very heavy work, or lactating, you're going to be lacking a lot of the calories in the diet because the forage is not going to support that. The other thing I want to point out is this 25, that's under ideal conditions. Now, remember we talked about NDF and ADF, some of your fiber numbers. Say that ADF and NDF is really quite high, you may not get that total intake of this hay into that 1,100-pound horse. They just may not be able to consume it or don't like it as far as the palatability. So this is really just a guideline for me to work with after getting a forage analysis and then coming back and talking to you about what your horse's age and activity level is. So are there any questions in the chat up to this point?
There's not currently any questions in the chat, but
Okay.
does anyone, or we can wait until the end to field questions from the audience if that's okay with you.
So now what I thought would be kind of neat to do is Ken actually had a sample from a field where he looked at last year, a 2021 sample versus 2022. My slides catch up here a minute. This is actually what this hay looked like from 2022. She sent me a picture of it. Are you guys seeing any slides?
We see the let's compare
Yeah.
the two fields.
Okay, here we go. There we go. Go back here. Okay. So on the left here is a sample that Ken sent in. You can see it was sampled on 6/16/2021. And harvest date was June 7th of that year. This other one on the other side, this is from this year. And the date received and sampled was 5/17. So, and from 2022. Okay. So what I thought I would kind of just point out here, these are two totally different years. All right. And two different ways of looking at two different analysis. Really, if you look through here, crude protein, 10.5 on the 2021, 9.75, pretty similar. The fiber levels from 21 to 22, very similar. Everything else is very similar, but what really would stand out to me is the actual calories per pound. Notice that this one is, and there's some conversions I did here because of mcals, kcals, etc. But basically this sample on the left is providing about 970 calories per pound of feed. This one on the right down at the bottom is 850, 860. So 120 calories per pound difference. Now that might not sound like a lot, guys, but if you're feeding 20 to 25 pounds of hay, that's a pretty large difference just from one hay to another hay year to year. The other thing that I noticed is look at the total starch. This one over here on from 2021 was actually a 1.3 level on starch. This is 1.9. So this sample on the right here is actually higher in starch, which tells me it might have been cut earlier than the year previous. And those are some considerations that I would take into looking at these two samples year to year and moving from one to another with some of those special needs horses. This is field 4. And again, there's video clips you can watch. This hay, again, first cutting 2022. Look at the difference in protein availability. You know, just going field to field, okay? This has a pretty good energy content, but the protein's quite a bit lower. So if we look at our same numbers and we compare, remember we looked at the back? This is the back of this hay, field 4. So notice we are significantly lower now in our crude protein level. And also we're not meeting what we call lysine, the first available limiting amino acid for the horse. And this is really critical for growth, okay? So this, with this hay, say Ken move from field 3 to field 4, and he said, I'm not seeing quite the same results in my growing horses. Well, it's probably because we need to change something in the diet because we're not hitting the protein that we need to with just the hay alone. Calorie wise, again, we're a little lower. Notice how this hay, it's actually predicting that the horse is going to eat a pound less. And why is that? Because the protein, the available protein was lower, the fiber was a little higher. So again, on this side, a lot of people ask, well, okay, fine. I have a horse that's in early lactation. You know, it's a mare. She's 3 months. She's nursing pretty heavy. This is telling me I need to make up somewhere 12,162 calories in the diet. How do I do that? To give you guys an idea, if you're buying a mid to a premium horse feed, okay, those mid to premium horse feeds are in the 1,250 to 1,500 calorie range. So if you were doing that early lactation, you're going to need of a mid calorie grain about 9.5, 9.7 pounds just to meet that mare's energy requirement. A little higher, a little less on a premium. Now, if somebody chooses to feed a, just a basic 12%, 14% pellet or textured feed with no extra fat or calorie content in it, you're going to be looking at quite a bit more, because the calories on those lower end feeds, they're going to run between 1,000 and 1,200 calories. So you can kind of see the difference in grain that you need depending on activity level or stage, and then what type of grain you feed. So in a nutshell, putting the understanding of all this to work, you know, there's no, if your safety isn't checked, if your hay is weed and mold free, there's really no such thing as good hay or bad hay. We work with what we have. We don't get to choose the quality of hay sometimes in the barn that we're at. Sometimes horse customers are just happy to get what they can get, especially if you're boarding. So the first step is understand what you have, okay, with or without a hay analysis. Without, you can use your senses and take a look. With the analysis, hopefully I've given you an understanding of, you know, just all the in-depth things we can look at and learn about from just doing a $20 to $25 hay analysis. And step 2 is to balance what's missing, utilizing grain or supplements if necessary. So just a couple things, understand what your hay does, provide then balance as necessary. You know, your digestible energy, it's really easy to tell. If your horse is nice, fat, slick, and shiny, you probably don't need those digestible energy. Protein amino acids, it's much more difficult to detect a deficiency, but typically you will see a protein deficiency across your top line. So the top of your horse, you may see a more pronounced you know, bone structure, not quite that nice crevice that we see. So that would be looking at this portion of your horse. If I can get my pointer on, sorry about that. Pointer. So this area right here is what I look at for protein. More this area, rib area, under the tail head, and also in the neck region is what I look for if we need more calories or fat. So now what do you want? What happens if you need to change fiber sources? And I'm going to refer to, this is a really good blog. It's called the Nutrina Feed Room. And I pulled some of this information directly off there. But I really liked this comment in here. This is from a horse owner that posted to this blog. They've moved their horses quite around, but they wanted to maintain consistency in as routine as possible. Always tried to make sure that I have 2 weeks worth of hay to take with me to help keep the diet consistent throughout a move and to allow for a gradual transition to the new hay. When I told the barn managers at the new facility that I was bringing a few bales of hay over, they seemed a little surprised at this and told me not to worry about it because they had really high quality hay. I asked them if they would recommend a sudden change in a horse's grain ration, and immediately they said, of course not, due to colic risk. I replied, then why would you switch your hay cold turkey when it makes up 60 to 90% of the horse's diet? Great point, guys. So a lot of people are always asking me, how do I change to a different grain, go from a pelleted feed to a textured feed? But they never usually ask me, what do I need to do when I'm changing my forage source, be it from, you know, first cut to second cut, or this year's hay to next, you know, last year's hay to brand new hay, pasture to hay. So really good thinking here. You know, if it's going to make up 90% of the diet, that's going to cause some real different changes in the gut health of the horse. So any sudden changes in diet, including fresh pasture and hay, can disrupt that gut environment in any species, but specifically in horses, because that's where the bugs reside. So that bug population that's in the horse's hindgut, that if that changes, that's what puts your horse at risk for any GI upsets, gas production, colic, diarrhea, discomfort. So as we've just seen, the energy and nutrient content in hay can really vary drastically depending on the species, geography, soil, plant maturity, everything. So even hay that comes out of the same field from consecutive cuttings can have large differences in quality. And like we showed here, even hay that comes out of the same field year to year can have really different quality and nutrient content. So good rule of thumb, it takes approximately 3 weeks for the microbes in a horse's gut to adapt to any dietary changes. So making slow changes over a 2 to 3 week period is important, not only for a grain source, but for a forage source if possible. When it isn't possible to make a full 2-week transition, allow for as much of a gradual transition as possible, even if it's over 2 or 3 days. So I'm hoping I gave you a little bit of background on, forage analysis, what we test for, how we test, what we look for, the differences in forages, where you would want to test for forage, some of the things you can do on your own as far as visual assessment, and then how we would use that to come up with a diet for individual horses based on their age, activity level, weight, and stage of life. So at this time, I'm free to take any questions, and hopefully I can answer them for you. And I appreciate your time tonight.
Thank you, Karen. It looks like we have our first question in the chat. So Holly asked, if you can't gradually adapt a horse to a different forage, would you supplement them with probiotics?
Absolutely. Great point, Holly. Probiotics are an excellent thing. I know in any of our premium equine feeds, it's just a given that we not only use probiotics, but pre, post, and probiotics in the feed. So I definitely would recommend that. Great question.
Are there any other questions for Karen? And since there's a relatively small number, if you want to type things in the chat, but you could also probably unmute and ask your question in real time too as well.
And I also want to say, if anybody does want to reach out to me and actually get a forage analysis done, I'm happy to do that. I work with many of the different retailers in your area, so we can work on a program or at least get you started looking at your hay in maybe a different light.
I just wanted to add a comment. Karen had talked about doing the forage samples and doing the hand samples or by probe. Certainly can go out and buy a probe, but also, check with your local cooperative extension. Some places your Soil and Water Conservation Service may offer that, or even the Natural Resource Conservation Service. So there are places to get those probes if it does give you a better analysis that way. So
It absolutely does. I mean, you could see just the difference in going crossways through several different bales. You really do get a better representative sample.
Karen, we had another question from Holly. So, should we reach out to our local Cargill office or contact you directly through email?
Well, since I am your Cargill contact, so definitely go right to me. You can reach right out to me.
Any other questions for Karen?
One thing I didn't mention that I probably should have, we had some really, a couple weeks of really pretty good pasture. And I know a lot of people like to utilize their nice lush pasture and get their horses out as soon as they can. One thing I really stress is I like to still get some of those horses fed some dry hay to get that mat in their gut before you start putting them out on fresh pasture. And again, you really need to watch when you're putting out on fresh pasture because it's pretty lush. I try to limit and build up gradually. Rotational pasture is awesome. I'm sure Ken can help you talk through that with you. But I still am a definite proponent of, give that horse, if you can, a little bit of dry hay before you throw them out to just, it does slow everything down and help the transition.
Any other questions? If not, thank you very, very much, Karen, for joining us. And like she mentioned, if you have any questions after the fact, their email's on the screen there. So thank you everyone for joining us tonight. And we will also be sending out the recording for this presentation.
Thank you very much, everyone.